This prison had one particularly bizarre rule. Inmates were forbidden from wearing any footwear, while every guard wore heavy-duty, heat-resistant insulated boots. Even stranger, the guards carried no weapons whatsoever. Just as the prisoners were puzzling over this, one of the guards pulled out a remote control from his belt and pressed a button. In an instant, a powerful electric current surged through the floor. This punishment, non-lethal but agonizing beyond imagination, allowed just 50 guards to maintain complete control over nearly 5,000 inmates. And that was only the lowest setting. After the captain finished his speech, the new arrivals were immediately taken away and changed into custom-made prison uniforms. On the surface, this place was a prison, but in reality, it operated more like a massive factory. People were thrown in here on all kinds of fabricated charges and forced into 10 brutal hours of hard labor every day. Each workshop had a supervisor who oversaw everything. Guards rarely set foot inside unless new inmates arrived, but they never worried about escape attempts. At the first sign of trouble, they could activate the floor's shock system and shut down any resistance instantly. To boost productivity, the prison held weekly performance reviews for all workshops. The top-ranked team received rewards, while everyone else got shocked. This drove the inmates to work frantically, never daring to slack off for even a second. The supervisor specifically told Mike that he needed to get up to speed fast, ideally mastering the entire production process within an hour. After each day's labor, everyone was sent back to their quarters. Each cell was a cramped, single-occupancy space of less than 30 square feet, designed like a sleep pod with all essentials mounted on the walls. 3 meals a day came through a tube, but the food was virtually inedible. If you wanted real food, you had to rank first in the evaluations. A screen in each cell displayed the inmate's remaining sentence, the number ticking down day by day. It was the only thing keeping them alive. But something unsettling had happened. Last month, the prison suddenly revised everyone's sentences across the board, doubling them without exception. Lately, inmates had been whispering about it, trying to figure out what the guards were planning. Before anyone could reach a conclusion, the supervisor cut the discussion short. If the guards overheard, the consequences would be unbearable. Just then, the intercom crackled to life, announcing lights out. Inmates had 30 seconds to get to their beds. Once the white indicator lights on the floor turned red, a lethal dose of electricity would be released. So even without any locked doors, nobody dared make a move. Soon enough, another day began. When the red lights switched back to white, the inmates were allowed to head to the workshops and resume work. The prison had 7 levels, built on a platform in the middle of the ocean, and this wasn't the only facility of its kind. Inmates on each floor were completely isolated from the others. The only way to communicate was through hand signals. Something major had clearly happened recently, but Mike, being new, couldn't understand what they were trying to say. All he could do was throw himself into the endless cycle of labor. Through constant learning and practice, Mike gradually mastered the workshop's entire production process. The supervisor kept pushing everyone to pick up the pace. This time, they had a real shot at first place. With only 1 day left before the evaluation, disaster struck. One inmate, unable to bear the crushing weight of life in this place, took his own life. Nobody truly mourned him. What they cared about was losing a worker, which would inevitably slow them down, fall behind, and they wouldn't make first place. Miss first place, and they'd all get shocked. With Workstation 3 now empty, their ranking had already dropped to 4th. Everyone scrambled to make up the difference. But Mike wasn't about to leave his fate in someone else's hands. From the moment he'd arrived, he'd been secretly plotting his escape. Every bathroom break, he'd sneak off to a hidden spot and saw away at a water pipe. He'd barely made any progress when the intercom blared again. New inmates had arrived. Mike quickly covered his tracks and rushed back to the workshop.
You man on the floor! Hold your position!
It was during this transfer that Mike spotted a critical flaw in the prison's defenses. The guards escorting the newcomers weren't wearing insulated boots, yet they stood unaffected while shocking the inmates. That meant the elevator platform wasn't connected to the electrical grid. This revelation gave Mike a spark of hope. If they could overpower the guards on that platform and seize their equipment, they might actually have a way out. But the timing wasn't right yet. First, he needed to convince the others to join him. With the new arrivals, the workshop's efficiency improved. Through everyone's combined effort, they finally clinched first place and avoided the shock punishment. But that same day, one inmate learned through sign language with the neighboring block that something serious had gone down on the second floor. Before Mike could get more details, the temperature in his cell suddenly spiked, and the air grew thin, making it hard to breathe. The lights cut out abruptly, then flickered back on a few seconds later. The supervisor immediately shut down any discussion, terrified that word might reach the guards and implicate him. Soon, the intercom ordered everyone back to their quarters. Once inside, Mike couldn't help asking the supervisor, hadn't he ever thought about escaping? The supervisor dodged the question. He only had 217 days left on his sentence. He wasn't about to take any risks this close to the finish line. But Mike kept pressing, which only made the supervisor more nervous, worried the guards might be listening. Mike calmly pointed out that the guards couldn't be bothered to eavesdrop. In their eyes, no one could possibly escape this place. When the supervisor refused to engage, Mike grew increasingly frustrated. He knew that for any escape plan to succeed, he needed the supervisor on his side. The next morning, news of what happened on the second floor finally spread. All 500 inmates, every single one, had been electrocuted to death. That's why the guards had cut power to the entire prison, explaining the brief blackout from before. This tragedy shook the supervisor to his core, even though he'd always worked himself to the bone for this place. But to keep everyone calm, he clenched his teeth and insisted it was just a rumor. Until the truth came out, everyone should keep working. Then, during the shift, an elderly inmate collapsed on his way back. His body had finally given out from exhaustion. The supervisor immediately called for the doctor. The doctor was also an inmate, and they'd known each other for a while. The supervisor hoped he could save the old man, who only had 40 days left until his release. But what the doctor said next stopped the supervisor cold. He flatly stated there was no point in saving him, because no one ever left this prison alive. As he spoke, he even pulled out a syringe, preparing to euthanize the old man on the spot. The supervisor pressed him about what really happened on the second floor. The doctor sent the nearby guard away on the pretense of needing a body bag, then whispered the truth. An inmate who'd supposedly been released from the 4th floor showed up on the 2nd floor the very next day. Once word got out, the guards executed everyone in that workshop. Both men were stunned. So-called release was nothing more than transferring people from one floor to another. Nobody ever actually left. Before they could ask more questions, a guard appeared. They had no choice but to return to the workshop. The doctor's words told Mike the time had come. He immediately started working on the supervisor, patiently making his case. Though the supervisor kept up a tough front, his resolve was clearly crumbling. He even asked if Mike already had a plan. Mike quietly explained that guards would be bringing in new inmates the next day. That would be their best chance to strike. In the end, the supervisor sided with Mike and told everyone the truth. No one was ever getting out of here. The only way to survive was to escape on their own. The other inmates, pushed to their breaking point, didn't hesitate. One by one, they joined the uprising. Once work began, Mike quietly took a metal rod from a fellow inmate and headed to the bathroom, where he pried open a water pipe and let the water gush out. Meanwhile, on the other side, guards were preparing to bring in the new arrivals. Mike still hadn't returned, and all his fellow inmates could do was stand at their stations, silently praying for him. Just before the guards noticed anything wrong, Mike slipped back to his post, right as water started leaking across the floor. Then the elevator platform activated, and the new inmates were brought in. The moment had arrived. Mike gave his signal with a single glance. 2 inmates immediately started a loud argument, which quickly escalated into chaos. While the guards were distracted by the commotion, Mike seized the opportunity to force stop the elevator platform. Other inmates rushed up, ready to grab the guards' weapons. One of the new arrivals caught on instantly, snatched a stun baton from the ground and knocked out a guard. But before he could celebrate, a guard above shot him dead. When the supervisor gave the order to attack, everyone hurled their tools and makeshift weapons upward. But against armed guards, it barely made a dent. Inmates fell one after another, yet no one retreated. If anything, they fought harder. Seeing the situation spiral out of control, the guards called for backup and demanded the floor's shock system be activated. Everyone scrambled onto the work tables to avoid the current, while those too slow weren't so lucky. But as water poured from the burst pipe, it shorted out the circuits and disabled the shock system entirely. The guards' last line of defense was gone. The supervisor seized the moment and rallied everyone to launch a full assault. Inmates surged upward in waves. Mike climbed to the upper level, took down 2 guards, and grabbed their weapons. They stormed into the workshop's control room. Meanwhile, the lower floors were flooding, and the inmates there still had no idea what was happening above. Armed prisoners now swept through like wild animals unleashed. The guards couldn't hold them back. One side had nothing left to lose, the other was terrified of death. Then the main control room's intercom blared. The entire prison would enter lethal shock mode in 40 seconds. All inmates were ordered to return to their cells immediately. Fortunately, the supervisor and Mike reached the control room just in time. The technicians inside were dumbfounded. They couldn't comprehend how inmates had gotten there. The supervisor ordered them to shut down the system. Defenseless, they complied. But Mike wasn't satisfied. He forced them to cut the main power entirely, the external hydroelectric system. With that done, the supervisor broadcast to the entire prison. They had taken control of the facility, and the floor shock system was offline. Anyone who wanted to live should leave their cell immediately, climb as high as they could, and take out any guard who got in their way. Once reinforcements arrived, it would be too late. Spurred on by the announcement, inmates poured out of their cells, racing toward freedom. The remaining guards, completely overwhelmed by the sudden uprising, cowered in their rooms, too scared to show their faces. 50 guards couldn't possibly suppress 5,000 prisoners. Soon, the inmates reached the prison's exterior. Despite the endless ocean stretching below them, they dove in without hesitation, swimming toward the distant shore, finally escaping their enslavement. But the supervisor, who couldn't swim, stayed behind forever.